Why hello there people from the internet, I'm the Russian Sniper and welcome to the mighty 1942. Battlefield 1942 came out in 2002 and contrary to popular belief, Battlefield 1942 was not the first Battlefield game. It was the first game to be called Battlefield, but before that, back in 1999, there was another game that came out, it was codenamed Eagle, made by DICE, and it was about World War II, so that's technically the grandfather of 1942, if you want to put it that way. Now, I was there in 2002 when the game launched and I played it, and I can honestly say it's just one of those things that you had to experience what it was back in those days rather than picking the game up on a sale or picking the game up maybe free on Origin years and years later and then playing it. You will not have the same experience as I had because you didn't play it back in those days. You know, you had to play it back in those days to experience the graphics, to experience the amount of stuff that was available for those days. The only game that came anywhere near this was Medal of Honor Allied Assault, again in 2002. But the sheer options that you had in this game, such as entering submarines, you can play in a submarine, you can enter the carriers that you had on the sea, you can shoot from them. You had tanks, you had jets, you had vehicles. You had 5 different classes. Yes, 5, not 4, what we have these days. You know, there were so many things that were just amazing for 2002 that these days it's kind of hard for you to imagine something that just blows your mind completely. You know, we had Battlefield 3, we had Battlefield 4, and it's just, yeah, we've kind of seen that just because there's so many companies making games out there. There's so many things that have been sort of borrowed from one to another that nothing's really surprising anymore. And Battlefield 1942 was just one of those games that you could not believe the amount of stuff that you could do in that game. While you didn't have the amount of stuff that you have in Battlefield 4 these days, I mean, it's possible in Battlefield 4 to play with a different loadout, with the amount of weapons that you have in the game. It is probably possible to play for months on end with a different loadout, just because there's so many guns and so many things that you can choose from in Battlefield 4. Apart from the graphics and the amount of things that you can do in Battlefield 1942, one of the best things was that each individual had its own separate weapon. Each class has a separate weapon and each faction had different weapons. You couldn't join as the Americans and play with the weapons that the Japanese had. You couldn't join as the Russians and play with weapons that the Japanese had. Lately in Battlefield games, everything's kind of standardized. You'll get the same weapons regardless of what faction you're playing, that you're playing for the Americans, you're playing for the Chinese or the Russians. You're going to get the same M16s and so on and so forth. So I really hope to see some of that magic being brought back into a game, and that's one of the reasons why 1942 was just a little bit different than anything that was out there at that time. And to top that, you had 64 and later 128 man servers. Huge maps for 2002, and I believe some of the maps are still some of the bigger maps from Battlefield 1942 are bigger than existing Battlefield maps. Another cool thing about Battlefield 1942 that each battle takes place on one of the several maps located in a variety of places and famous battlefields all over the world. The Pacific, the European, the North American, the Eastern and the Italian fronts were all available for you to play. Combat's always fought between the Axis powers and the Allies. You can choose who you want to play. If you want to play as Germany, then you have to be the Axis powers. If you want to play as the Allies, then you'll have to be the US. Location determines the non-specific sort of army to that. If you're playing, say, Wake Island, you can only play as the Japanese or the US, while if you're playing on El Alamein, you can only play as Germany or the United Kingdom. The maps in 1942 are based on real battles, and you could literally play that and have a bit of fun on it your own way. Some of the major battles from 1942 were in this game, and for you to be able to play those, the largest battle in history, the tank battle in history, is the Battle of Kursk. You can play in Stalingrad, you can play Wake Island, Guadalcanal, you can play Iwo Jima, you can play the Coral Sea. There is just so many iconic battles from World War II, and you can play most of those in Battlefield 1942. And to even top that, Battlefield released 2 more DLCs for the game. In February of 2003, Battlefield 1942 had The Road to Rome, and that brought the Italian front to the game with the factions and the weapons. And also in September of 2003, they've added Battlefield 1942 Secret Weapons of World War II. Those are just some of the things that made Battlefield 1942 the game that it was, and there's no better way for me to end this video without leaving you watching one of the most iconic trailers of them all. Enjoy.